Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to today's press conference of the Democratic Labour Party. We welcome all of our viewers, our friends, our sympathizers, because we think that this is a good opportunity to let you know what is happening in the party, what is happening in the country, and to give you an opportunity to hear what is really happening on the ground in Barbados. We're starting a few minutes late, but without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our president, Dr. Ronnie Yearwood. Sir, thank you.
Good morning, Barbados. Good morning to members and supporters of the Democratic Labour Party. Good morning to members of the press, those watching in Barbados and those watching abroad. We made a commitment in January that we would have these monthly press conferences and engagements with the media and with the country to share our views, as Comrade Paul said, on what's happening in Barbados and what's happening on the ground. The reality is we have to be honest about where we are as a society, and it's definitely not business as usual. And if we're not honest about where we are, we can't get the policy solutions or prescriptions that we need to make things better. Our society, as you would appreciate, and a lot of us know, but we also still have to tell the story, is breaking down. Really, Barbados in many ways is coming apart at the seams. Whether we talk about health, whether we talk about labor, crime, education, tourism, integrity legislation. You know, people have to wait for a bus or ambulance that doesn't come, even though we're told that we had more buses and we had more ambulances. Your garbage is being picked up sometimes 3 weeks late. This is happening to residences and persons in West Terrace area, St. James South, persons in Spikestown, St. Peter. These are real stories. Sometimes it's 3 weeks at a time for garbage collection. Now, though we have a government that will tell us that we've got new garbage bins and we've got more trucks. We go into the supermarket, people simply can't afford certain items. You have to stretch your dollar to get a whole chicken to cook for your Sunday lunch. $30 at a pop sometimes. That's after you've worked all week, support your family, and you want that one day that you can relax, you can enjoy, share with your family, have your mother, your father, your grandparents, your uncle, whoever over, as we always have done in the Barbadian tradition. That simple, honest, down-to-earth Barbadian way of life is being eroded. Yet, the government will talk about price compacts and holding down prices for you. You know, we have to wait not hours, but days at the QEH before being admitted to be seen. And these are real stories. There's a story that recently I read, and I'm just going to share it with you because I think you need to understand really what Barbadians are facing up there, where a young lady reported having to spend literally 5 days before her grandmother was admitted to QEH, and then days before an IV drip was put into her grandmother. And then unfortunately, and the sad bit, her grandmother passed. These are real stories. And every day you open your social media, Twitter, whatever, you actually have stories where people count the days that they're sitting in A&E, sitting, waiting to be admitted, to be put on a ward. Yet, we're told that there's more money going to the QH. Yet, we're told there's supposed to be this beautifully renovated A&E department. The reality is our Anansi of us Prime Minister and the government spins tales. They're tales that are not real. They do not match the lives and what people are experiencing in this country. The reality is we know the social services are being eroded in health. There's a breakdown in labor relations. And the integrity life in public life bill that should give us confidence in our government that it's going to repair trust and honesty and it's going to work hard for our people is compromised by its very structure. And I want to make this very clear that the Democratic Labour Party supports the idea and the concept of an integrity in public life bill. I do not want the media, I do not want anyone to go out of this conference saying that we've opposed the bill. We do not. I support the idea, the concept, the implementation, the execution of an integrity in public life bill. My problem, as I will explain shortly, is that this bill has many failings which compromises the very thing that we're trying to achieve. Now, and that's where I'm going to start. So when we look at the Integrity and Public Life Bill, we had the Attorney General making this very blasé, broad statement that they cannot include judges because of a case in Trinidad, which does not match up. Because I think the Attorney General was trying to compare apples and oranges. You know, the fact is, if you look at the Trinidad Constitution, it made provision for an integrity commission. So I can understand the friction that came up between their integrity commission in the Constitution and trying to make provision for the integrity bill to cover judges. I don't believe that we have the same situation. And the reality is, with all 30 seats, you could make the particular constitutional amendments if you feel that there are problems to include judges in the integrity public life bill. So the bill starts off with a contradiction where only new judges are included. That doesn't make sense. So you're creating a two-tier system where some people will make declarations and then other people within the same system, supposed to be functioning under the same rules, are not making declarations. If I were a new judge coming into the system, I would not be happy that other persons function under the same, they're judges like me, they're getting the same compensation, same remuneration, are being excluded from a bill that should cover everyone in public life. If you're in public life, you're in public life. Therefore, the Attorney General and the Barbados Labour Party government needs to go back to the drawing board and fix that, because it does not sit well with the public. You cannot have exclusions to those that are to be included in this bill. And when you think about it, some of these persons excluded, they are young persons. So they're going to be excluded for another good 15 to 20 years. We're not talking about an exclusion that's a year or two. We're talking people coming up to their retirement. So the bill is not covering them for a very, 2, 3, 4 governmental cycles. And that can't be right. Furthermore, when you look at the bill, how is the commission sending its financial reports on its activities and its reports on its activities to the Prime Minister? That makes no sense. If we are talking about transparency, if you are a commission of integrity, your report should go directly to Parliament, or if you want them to go in conjunction, to the President and Parliament. You can't be sending reports to the Prime Minister, who is supposed to be being covered by the very integrity bill. That can't make sense. So the Prime Minister then has an ability to see a report before Parliament sees the report. And that's not right, because when you look at the integrity bill in Trinidad, if they're talking about Trinidad and it sees the government likes to use that as the example, the annual reports go to the President in the first instance and then to Parliament. If you look at the Commonwealth model legislation on this, they suggested that you send the reports to the Speaker of the House so they go to the Parliament. A Prime Minister, and I'm not picking out any Prime Minister, is not about the personality of the Prime Minister, this is talking about the office. A Prime Minister has no function in receiving reports from a Commission of Integrity. However, the way our integrity legislation is set up, the Prime Minister has a function in receiving reports, and that cannot be right. So the bill is flawed in that sense. You cannot talk about in transparency and you want to become your own guard. Makes no sense. Now, the other problem that we have with this bill, funding. Section 3.4 notes that the members of the commission are entitled to allowances and remuneration as determined by the Minister of Finance. We know in our system, the Minister of Finance is usually the Prime Minister. So we're back to an insertion by the office of the Prime Minister. This is also problematic because it is given the office of the Prime Minister and a Prime Minister funding ability over a commission. That means in reality or in hypothetical circumstances, you can strangle the work of the commission because you can starve them of funds. The Prime Minister should not even have that ability or option available to them. That is problematic. In other places, we see that there's a broad salary review board, or there's an independent commission, or there's a trust fund set up that funds the the Integrity Commission directly without any involvement from a Minister of Finance, because the Commission is supposed to be monitoring the Minister of Finance. You can't monitor who paying you. The two don't add up. Now, appointment of the Commission, and this is the big bugbear. The bill before Parliament at the moment gives the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition involvement in selecting the commissioners. The President consults, this is what it says, consults with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in appointing 3 commissioners. The President consults with the Prime Minister in appointing 1, and then the President consults with the Opposition Leader in appointing another. So that means that the Prime Minister, because let's be realistic, when we see consult in our legislation, in our law, that essentially means that the Prime Minister is recommending who the person. If the President has full discretionary powers, we often see that it would say the President in his or her own discretion, meaning that they have the fundamental, that is their choice by right. So in this circumstance, you have basically the Prime Minister appointing 4 of the commissioners, because in our present circumstances, there's no Leader of the Opposition in Parliament. So if this commission were established tomorrow, that means that the Prime Minister selects the 3, then she selects the 1 on her own, that's 4, and then there's the only one, well, no, actually, it's all of them, because they're in the opposition to the consult. So technically, in our current circumstance, when you work through it, all the commissioners will be selected by the Prime Minister without cap. Again, that makes no sense. That is problematic. How do you have a commission that's supposed to represent honesty and transparency, and the persons involved that it should be monitoring are involved in the selection of the commissioner? What should really be happening is that those commissioners should be selected by the President in his or her own discretion, so that you remove the political operatives from any place within this Integrity Commission. Also, what we recognize, there are no definitions of abuse of office or willful misconduct or neglect of duty. And these are definitions that you can find in other Commonwealth laws, and they're provided for. The other concern that was raised is that the declarations under Section 11 may not necessarily be confidential, and that needs to be made clear. And importantly, it is also somewhat absurd to make declarations regarding spouses and dependent children, but you've not included adult non-dependent children, which can also be conduits for the proceeds of corruption. So really, what we are saying is that we agree with the principle of integrity legislation. We're saying that this current form of integrity legislation is just as flawed as the last attempt that the government made when they all self-sabotage, really. And we've come back to the drawing board, and we've come back with an Integrity in Public Life Act that I think does not meet the standards of honesty, dignity, and what we expect in terms of transparency for Barbadians. What we will suggest is a fully independent commission funded by a trust fund set up where it would have investors. Therefore, a Minister of Finance is not determining the funding for the commission. We will also suggest that the trust fund also fund the Auditor General, because we can see what problems when these independent bodies that rely on funding from the government happens when they don't get the funding. And we can't allow a commission of an Integrity Commission to have the same problems of staffing, etc., that the Auditor General has because of lack of funding. So if we're going to do this, and we're going to do it right, and we're going to do it properly, let us set up an independent trust fund run by a board of advisors. These 2 bodies, the Auditor General and the Commission, should have their own money to control their own resources, hire who they need to, provide for their investigations, pay for their staff, and it has nothing to do with any Minister of Finance or any Prime Minister. You know what folks got to say? You can't have Satan correcting sin. And really, that is what we have in this, that is what we have right now in this Integrity in Public Life Act. You got Satan attempting to correct sin. It does not make any sense. A Prime Minister cannot, and this again is the office, not the personality, a Prime Minister, any Prime Minister cannot be at the heart of an Integrity in Public Life bill or law, and certainly not you, Madam Prime Minister. definitely not you. You know, you cannot be receiving any reports from the commission before they get to Parliament. You cannot be setting the pay of the commissioners. And certainly, you cannot be involved in choosing the commissioners. So if we really want this to be independent, we have to make it independent. And as I said, 2 ways to do that: independent trust fund, so they have their own sources of fund, and remove the prime minister, and we remove the opposition leader, because this is not about me, this is not about the prime minister, this is about what is good for Barbados. And you know, people always make that thing, you know, you say one thing, opposition, and then when you get here, you're going to change it. I do not want this power. I don't want it if we're in opposition. I don't want it if we're in government, because it does not belong to any political party, whether you're government or whether you're opposition. This should be a power for an actual and truly independent body if we're serious about integrity legislation in this country. I'll hand over to my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, we will go to the voice on labor, Mr. Walter Maloney, to address what we consider to be some very pressing matters, and he would elucidate further. Walter, over to you.
Thank you, Brother Paul. Good morning to the members of the press, and indeed members of the Democratic Labour Party who's listening in this morning, and to those in the diaspora, we know who are eagerly listening as well. The 3 areas that I need to touch on this morning, and as far as what is happening in this country in regards to labor relations. And the 3 areas I'm going to touch on is we're going to look at salary negotiations that's currently going on within the public service. We'll also look at pension reform as exposed by the Prime Minister, I think, in the last throne speech, and also contracts in the public service. And so we start with salary negotiations first. I think it is only fitting, I heard the President made a point, that anything less than 5% for public servants will be a travesty of justice. And so we can start from that premise. In 2018, the unions in Barbados asked the then government for a 23% increase. It was unrealistic. Knew at the time, anyone living in this country, knew that there is no country, and Barbados, especially Barbados, could not have taken a 23% and give it to anybody.
Nope.
But we saw how that folded up. It played out into a political arena. We saw the unions marching, and the then opposition leader, along with her colleagues, being part of the march. And this whole idea of trying to ramrod the then government into a 23%. Unfortunately, public servants took up demands as well and believed it, only to find out sooner after the elections that the person who was the opposition leader at the time and became the prime minister offered 4.5%, which was upgraded to 5%. The extra 0.5% was then added, and the unions accepted wholeheartedly 5% increase. Now we have the unions in 2023 asking the said person for an 11% increase. It is very ironic, though, that the offer made by government is 2%. So in 2018, when the economy was lagging, we were in some serious trouble economically. We knew then we could not have carried 23%. But now the expected growth in the economy, and now with the boasting of all of the foreign exchange that we have, and also with the fact that we have been able to give selected people increases, we have for example, the taxi drivers at the airport ranging between 60 and 80% increase. We have senior ministers who have been given $2,000 more of their salaries. And yet, you have selected a group of persons, and when it comes to the public officers, you are saying you can only offer 2%. and I'm going to make this point now. If the unions in this country accept anything less than, I would say, 6%, then it's a travesty of justice to its membership and to the wider public service. You cannot accept 2%. In an environment where it is very difficult right now for persons to even hold a head above water, you have public servants just existing below near or below the poverty line, and that is a fact. People are struggling to pay the mortgages. People are struggling to feed the family and to pay the bills. And to give a 2% increase in this environment is not going to be anything to them. It doesn't make sense. It does not make sense. And I'll say what I say because recently we also heard about persons going home. In effect, what has happened in this country is that from the turn of COVID, when COVID came into the country, and persons were losing their jobs and stuff, what you saw was that in many households in this country, one person was taking the burden of that household. And in a lot of cases, there wasn't only one household they were doing as well. Because if you had a brother or sister who had lost their job in the hotel industry, then the person who continued to work most likely would have been a public servant. He or she then was helping out her brother to pay the rent, or the sister to help pay the mortgage, or to help buy food. And that is the reality in this country. So to accept, and I'm going back again, the fact that the government is willing to offer a 2% increase to public service is laughable, not laudable. It's laughable, and they should never even entertain it. And I'm wondering, I'm waiting to see what is going to be the response of the union this time. I'm waiting to see what the response would be, because they will be right, and they're right, to take whatever action they are deemed fit. This time around, the last time around, it was utter nonsense. It was all political gerrymandering, and this time around, the interest of the membership, you need to insist that you cannot and would not accept 2%, and certainly anything less than 6%, I don't think is worth it. So that is the as far as the salary negotiations are concerned. The second thing we want to look at is this whole idea of contracts in the public service. And we all know what's been happening recently. They've been offering contracts to persons at particular levels in the service. That is what people think. But I also want the press to understand that there are entry-level positions in the public service that persons have been offered contracts as well. So you have clerical officers working on a contract. So there's not only persons at the top. Okay? There are persons who are coming to the public service and working for 6 months on contract. What a contract does. You see, a person like I'm not going to call a person at the top of the public service receiving a contract, a 3-year contract, okay, is entitled to a gratuitous payment after 1 year. Every year you get a gratuitous payment, right? So, but the persons who are coming in under them, the clerical officers and those, they're not going to be given any, not gratuitous payment. That's what I'm saying? So you look after a certain set. And this comes down to the point now where you went ahead and hired over 3,000 people to work in the bushing area, and you worked them, they were working in COVID. You have some of them working in the schools as monitors, okay? Those persons now are going to be without a job because a lot of them were on contract. They're going to lose their job. Remember what he said? You at a particular level to give a gratuitous payment. These brothers and sisters is not going to be given any gratuitous payment. Some are not even going to be entitled to unemployment. They're not going to be entitled to severance. Okay? So the question has to be, is there a set of rules for white-collar worker as opposed to a blue-collar worker? What differentiates the guy who was cutting the grass for the last 2 years on contract from the person working in a department? What separates the two of them? Why is that individual entitled to gratuity payment, or why am I not entitled to one? Same contract. Okay? And it tells me that the interest, therefore, could not have been to the person at the bottom. The interest is not there for them. That was more of a political stance, okay? We are going to give you something for a length of time, make you feel good, then we take it back from you, and there's nothing that we have for you anymore. We don't owe you nothing. But the person at the top, who will be given, and in most cases, some persons who are already in the public service, when they're offered a contract at a higher level, it's normally a 3-year contract. They are no paid leave from the substantive post, but they're being paid in the post, okay? And they want to get the maturity. When that 3-year period is up and the contract is not renewed, they revert back to their substantive post. So their employment don't cease. Their employment continues. But in the case of the brothers who were doing a wonderful job, cleaning up the ash and cutting the grass, I say people talked a lot about that they weren't working and all that kind of thing. That's another discussion. Okay, I saw some of them and they were doing a pretty good job. The point remains, however, though, what differentiates them from the person who is working in the white collar job? And if that was done today, those persons going home would have known that they would be going home with something substantial in the pocket, because some of them would have worked 2 and almost 3 years. And that is something that needs to be corrected. And the powers that be would have to tell them that. Why is it that you have not taken care of me? You've taken care of the other persons, but you haven't taken care of me. And that is that's basically what this is about, right? And then now we're going to look now at the whole idea of pension reform. You heard the Prime Minister spoke about, I think it was during the last throne speech. They still haven't throne. You still refer to a throne? No? Okay. And the whole idea was about moving the public service into one where if you were in the public services itself, you work 33 to 30 years. Persons who work in statutory boards have to work for 40 years in order to get a pension, right? And so the idea was to bring everybody that coming into the service now under 40 years, right? So you work 40 years instead of 33. So you will work an extra 6 and to 30 years before you get your pension. Of course, the arrangements for the politicians remain. Once they do their 2 terms, they're entitled to their pension. So nothing adds on to them. But the problem is this. You're asking persons to work longer, right? And you're not looking and saying what benefits that I can get besides having to hold on for my pension. And I like to look at the model in Bermuda. The Bermuda model was very simple. You work for X amount of years, and then you can apply to the government for a portion of your gratuity. Okay? Of course, that money is only used in specific areas. Education, health, if you're looking to build a house, right? Those 3 areas, not to party, not to do nonsense with. But that money is, and the checks are written directly to whoever the entity is that you're dealing with, right? And the reason we need to push this, because we see what is happening in Barbados. There's too many people, a lot of people are not going to get that 40 years. They are not going to get the 40 years. I know persons who get 32 and died. Okay? And we are saying that the monies you're already contributing to it anyhow. So let us we can work out the proportion. It could be 5% of the sum as the time it is, and that sum will be used for another. And you cannot come back like 5 or 6 times to the money anyhow, right? But you know that in case something happened, you know you can go and say, well, look, my son want to go to the university, and if I can get $5,000 or $20,000 off my gratuity now, because when I retire, it's going to be $20,000 less anyhow, right? And they can use that. I can use that to start to build a house, because the thing is that most public servants would only own a home, or by the time they get between 35 and 40, maybe 35 and 40. And in most cases, when people do retire, you see that gratuity is used to help to pay off a mortgage. not to go on cruises and that. I don't get tired of that nonsense that people put in that thing in your head. Majority of the time, your gratuity is used to cover outstanding bills that you're dealing with, mostly your mortgage, right? So I'm saying to you, if you ask persons to work 6 2/3 years longer, why is it that you can't sit down and say, well, look, let me see if we can get some benefits as well? You asking for that? Give me something on the other hand, right? And I think that's something that the Democratic Labour Party, through the president and through the officers of this organization, would need to push because it's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
It is reasonable. People are struggling. And no matter of fact, this whole idea about pension reform, and people are not looking at pensioners as is, they're looking at people who are working. But let's look at the persons who are on pensions or fixed pension. If you offer the public service a 2% increase, we have negotiated that once public service receive an increase, pensioners will receive 1.5% of whatever the increase is. Now, so you work out in your brain, you all bright people here, 1.5% of 2%, and tell me how much that is being added to a pensioner's pension. Explain that to me. So there's no thought going in to the pensioners.
Mm-hmm.
This consists of a very large block of persons, but you're not giving no thought at all is going to them. And pensioners are struggling. People are struggling. Because you become a pensioner, your life do not stop. Your children do not automatically become 60. Majority of them, some of them still living home. And the essence is this argument is this: there are a number of homes in Barbados where a pension check is the only money that comes into the house. Mm-hmm. And that is a fact. And with more people going home, that is going to become even more glaring. So what is it you're going to do to try to eliminate that kind of hardship that's being placed on your pensioner? And it certainly can't come from a 2% increase. It cannot come from a 2% increase. And anybody who allows that to happen, I'm sorry, but it is wrong. It will be wrong. It will be wrong. So we need to be able to address those issues. There are a number of other things that needs to be addressed, but the president would have said that would take us some more time. But those 3 areas which are glaring at the moment. I would end by saying this. Expect to see more and more so-called wildcat strikes emanated from the public service. There's a lot of disquiet within the service.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
A lot.
Mm-hmm.
People who are close to or are ready to retire. People who want to leave. There's a lot of supersession going on in the public service. There are persons who are coming into the service and being promoted in front of persons who were there and qualified as well. And there's reasons why people are not, the public service who are not even, when the jobs are being advertised on contract, is not applying for them. Because it will tell you, we know who get the job, doesn't make any sense. And that is a fact. They will tell you up front, support Walter, make any sense of applying. Because we know who's going to get the job. Right? There's no transparency in this thing either. Okay? And what we are seeing more and more of is this kind of happenings in the public service. And we will get to the private sector at some point, but that's another discussion.
Thank you, Walter Maloney. As usual, very comprehensive and very detailed prosecution of what is happening in labor at this time. We now move to matters of health. You can pass the mics. Quite a lot has been happening in the area of health in Barbados. And following the last press conference that we had here at the Democratic Labour Party, we realized that the handlers of the government came out. They came out to deal with the responses to the financial proposals made by the president of the Democratic Labour Party, Dr. Ronnie Yearwood. Kimara Stewart, the matters of education and the matters of health that we addressed on the last occasion. Now, the reality is that we are not here to just talk about things because we want to be in the news. The Democratic Labour Party has always had a foundation of dealing with matters regarding the people of Barbados and the interests of Barbados and the various classes of persons in Barbados, because that's who we are, and we are that these people are important to us as a party. And so the reason why we come and speak to matters is not because we want to be popular or we are concerned about what is happening. And we just don't want the government to come out and handle situations and to bring out their media spinners to deal with matters. We want them to address the issues that we are raising here at this table in labor, in finance, and in health. And to that end, we realized that following our press conference, the hunks came out. They brought the various persons to address the issues that we raised in our press conference. We had Mrs. Greenidge, the COO of the QEH. We had Dr. Cheney Williams, a very hard worker, of course, doing a tremendous job over many years in the QEH. And we had the Minister of State, who very candidly repeated and addressed the matters that most Barbadians are familiar with, which are the long wait times. She said on that occasion that they were looking at lowering those wait times. And, you know, that sounds good to the ear. But what the Democratic Labour Party really wants to know is what are the real timelines for lowering the wait times. And we want there to be a staging of these wait times. We stated in our last press conference that it was 49 hours to be seen by a physician. And we know that according to the CTAS, which is the Canadian Triage Acuity Scale, that there are set wait times established by that organization. And I want to add here that the QEH has been certified by the Canadian body in terms of being accredited. And if that's the case, and they're using the CTAS or the Canadian Triage Acuity score, we know that in that score, level 1 is a life-threatening, for life-threatening situations. There is immediacy in care. So you are seen immediately, and that's done 98% of the time. On the CTAS as well, there's emergency evaluation, which is supposed to occur in 1 hour. That's the level 2. There's level 3, which is the potentially unstable situation, which is to be seen in 1 hour. And we have then you go into the stages of non-emergency evaluation, which happens within 60 minutes, and you double the times as you go along up to level 3, which is green, which is 180 minutes. Now you're talking about 180 minutes in an accident and emergency department, but currently using the CTAS model, which QEH comes under, they're doing 48 hours and 49 hours. So when the minister says that they're going to make corrections to their timelines, the Democratic Labour Party is asking on the behalf of the citizens of Barbados and our family members, because that's the only hospital we have, isn't it? We want to find out what are the stakes in the ground, what are the measures, what are the key performance indicators that you're going to use to determine the new timelines for the citizens of Barbados. Are we going to go to 12 hours in 6 months? Are we going to go to 12 hours in 3 months? We want to actually know what is the plan, because we are watching. We are going to put your foot to the fire, because this is what the people of Barbados are asking for. We don't just want to have you saying and spinning in the news that you are going to shorten timelines. We want to know what are those times. We also want to know, in respect to decompression of the accident emergency department, what are the staff complements that you're going to assign to reducing or to decompress the pressures that we're seeing to lower this 48 and 49 hour timeline? Because we know that currently the doctors, the nurses, the medical staff, and so on the QEH are under tremendous pressure. And I want to concur with Walter Maloney when he says that there's going to be a lot more flash, what do you call it? Wildcat strikes. And because it is not only happening overseas, but nurses have had enough. Medical records and technologists and so on have had enough. And we are saying to them, we are saying to the government of Barbados, if they do not want to see more wildcat strikes, they need to address the issue of the human resource at the community Elizabeth Hospital and in our medical facilities. It is of concern, and we don't want, on behalf of our families, to have that wildcat strike happen. But we want them to address the patient ratios to nursing staff. It is an issue that is really getting out of hand. And the reason why that is happening, and we want you to note this, nurses are leaving the profession in droves right now. And they're going to places of greener pasture where the patient ratio is sometimes 3 to 4 persons per nurse. We have a ward sometimes with 30 patients to just 2 nurses or sometimes 1 nurse, because they're under so much pressure that they're taking a lot more time off from work. The same thing is happening with the physicians and the doctors. There is so much work, so much throughput, and this is becoming an issue. And so we want this to be looked at. The other thing is that the Democratic Labour Party is calling for a need to look at increased accommodation for more patients, so that we can decompress and move patients out of the A&E department so that they can be onto wards. So there needs to be some buildings. We don't want you to just build golden parks and hero circles and hero squares. We want you to build places that patients can go, take some of that money and put into building new facilities to house patients who are coming in the A&E department. There is another section of the A&E department that needs to be repaired and rebuilt. They say they can't find any money to build it, but they can build a hero square. We should not be about building legacy. We should be about building a society and building communities and taking care of Barbadians who are giving the best years of their life to running this country. With that said, we want to then look as a party at the health levy. Persons earning $6,000 or more are asked to have a 1% health levy removed from their salaries, which goes to taking care of health. Now, health is not cheap, it's expensive. But the government is collecting a lot of money in the health levy. And if that's the case, it means that we want to make sure that that health levy is going towards the taking care, the management of the hospital. Now, there's an issue that the Minister of State, Dr. Sonia Brown, addressed in her last press conference on the radio, where she said that the issue with the gauze on the ward and those 100 and something patients that were rejected and turned back was not true. I want to suggest that was a case of peddling fiction, because in reality, all of those persons that were there in live and living color were sent home because there was no gauze. Now, you may say, so what? And I want to bring attention to the implications of that. Now, Barbados is considered to be the amputation capital of the Caribbean. It is very unfortunate because of the high levels of NCDs. When a person who has been scheduled to be seen or have a dressing change on a particular day comes to the hospital and have to go back home for another week or 2 weeks or whatever, you have created a window of time where a person can have what's called a nosocomial infection or a pseudomonas infection. It could have been caught on that visit, but because they had to go back home for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks in some cases, you could have a gangrenous foot on your hands, which leads to an amputation, which can lead to months and months of trying to secure and granulate infection or a sore. And you can the person can have more amputations or even lose an entire leg. And then that has implications in terms of work, in terms of employment, in terms of time away from work, in terms of family. And so not having gauze is not just not having gauze. It has far-reaching secondary healthcare cost implications. And this is why we as a Democratic Party are taking it very serious. When you are taking people's health levy, you need to make sure that basic things are in place regarding supplies for the hospital. And for that, we are calling for key performance indicators to be put in the procurement department to ensure that when you're coming down to certain levels of gauze, a red flag, it needs to be flagged. We're saying we need to be able to flag something as significant as that, along with other things like biopsy needles and so on, because they're not getting the level of prostate checks that we have because there was a level of the issue with biopsy needles. We need a cell catcher to do brain tumors and so on. These are things that are lacking at the moment, are important to the care in the hospital in Barbados. Which now leads us to an issue that we raised in our last press conference again, which is that of the polyclinic. We realize that the system in the polyclinic is breaking down. I mentioned that as children, we went to the polyclinic to have our teeth done, to have our eyes checked, to get our vaccinations, to get our minor surgeries and cuts and bruises managed. Cuts and bruises are now being managed at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And the reason for that is that the polyclinic system is not set up in a way to adequately manage these issues. No, the Sir Winston Scott Polyclinic is supposed to be the next step down from before you get to the community, the tertiary institution. It's supposed to be a primary care level treatment center. And it does not even have a X-ray machine, and it does not have a blood testing facility. Persons have to leave Sir Winston Scott and go to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, get X-rays, and come back to the polyclinic. They have to go to the QEH, get blood tests, and come back to the Sir Winston Scott Polyclinic. Do you see the redundancy in the situation there? It is a lot of redundancy, and it causes a level of complexity in giving of primary care to patients. The Democratic Labour Party is suggesting that, like the field hospital that the Barbados Defense Force had set up the other day, where they had a portable X-ray machine called a mini X-ray, that something that be purchased. It's just $500,000. If you're buying a bus that don't work for $700,000, I don't see where you can invest in an X-ray machine that will give you life and duration and improve the quality of life of Barbadians. Invest in an X-ray machine that will allow you to see patients, to see broken bones, fractures, and so on. People swallow money or seeds or whatever. Children swallow money and seeds. That it can be seen, X-rayed at that time on the spot, and that care could be remedied and offered to patients in the context of that 24-hour facility. We are also requesting and suggesting that you consider a small laboratory at those 24-hour facilities in St. John and at Sir Winston Scott, where you can do your blood panels, you can do your troponin levels, you can do your D-dimers, and deal with blood clots and different things in those environments in the event that the persons are you want to remove persons away from the hospital. We continue to call for greater attention to be paid to the building infrastructure and so on, and to make sure that the elderly are not left at the hospital, but they're sent to the nursing homes and so on. And so we are calling for that nursing home to be built with a sense of urgency. It is very, very important that we get those nursing homes built, because you're not building for legacy and building heroes parks. We want you to build nursing homes to take care of the elderly Barbadians. And lastly, I want to look at the environmental officer. For a long time, there has been no dedicated, for almost a year, they did not have a committed environmental officer at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I don't know what happened during COVID, but we're calling for there to be a dedicated environmental officer who will look about the matters of water quality. We know that there have been issues of water quality at the QEH, and that environmental officer has to be in place to look at water quality. We're hearing of issues of I don't know if it's called Johnny Apostles or John Apostles. You know what they are in Barbados. In the kitchen area, where the trays are, we are asking an environmental officer will oversee things to ensure that there are no infestation of pests and Johnny Apostles and so on in our kitchen. This is things that the environmental officers do. Looking at general matters of incineration and sanitation of the hospital. And lastly, I want to bring attention to the nursing situation at the QEH. The nurses at the QEH are burnt out. They are tired. They're overworked. And the patients, of course, this could possibly affect patient care. The level of nursing required, you need an additional 250 nurses at QEH. We need nurses that can speak English. It is one thing to bring nurses from Cuba to come to Barbados, but they cannot help the nurses in Barbados if a patient calls out and they don't understand the language or they can't communicate with the patient. What is happening is that those Cuban nurses are being assigned to doing temperatures, blood pressures, and basic nursing testing. We're saying if you are going to do that, we want to have nurses that speak English. There are a lot of persons that did not complete the 2-year GNC degree. And so we're saying that we can utilize some of those persons who did not finish the GNC, the General Nursing Council exam, and use those English-speaking persons as nursing assistants. We could find place for Barbadians employment. The same way we are paying the Cubans and paying the Ghanaians, we can find places for work for Barbadian nurses in our system by allowing them to be able to do the pressures and so on. So there's a lot to be done, but we are fundamentally calling for measurements, key performance indicators, and we are going to come back and act again. We're not going to be handled. Democratic Party will not be handled. The people of Barbados will not be handled, and so on. But we are asking you to put stakes in the ground to say when you will have outcomes and measurable, quantifiable, smart objectives in regards to fixing the accident emergency, the elderly care situation, the environmental officers, matters regarding to HR, matters regarding to nursing, matters regarding to the elderly, and we are asking matters regarding the polyclinic, matters regarding spending and setting flags for procurement and management of resources and so on. And so these are the issues that we are putting on the table, and we're going to come back to it again. The matters of labor, we're going to come back to issues of the president. And so without further ado, I'd like to hand over to the president and to the media at this time if there are any questions for the panel.
Thank you very much, Comrade Paul, for your usual erudite and thorough analysis of the issues in health. Thank you, Walter, for joining us to share on your expertise on labor. And as you can see, as I said, this is our monthly press conference, and we will be utilizing the skills and the talent, and to also show that the party has skills and talents. And it's important that Walter is here to represent that and share his experience and years on labor matters in a way, to be honest, that few in either party and in the other party or even in the labor unions probably could do. So we're thankful for him. I want to open now the floor for the press for any particular questions that they may have. Yes.
Hi, good morning. Paul Manzi from. Yes, hi, good morning. Good morning to the panel. Paul Manzi from Nation News. I have quite a few questions, but I was my interest was particularly piqued by a comment made by former NUPW President Mr. Walter Maloney. Now, you warned of the possibility of more wildcat strikes. Now, I noted interest that you did not say more strikes or union organized strikes or anything of that nature. Now, the fact that you are saying that it's likely to provide a strike, what does that say about the how the union is currently handling, especially the union that is largely responsible for advocacy of the public sector, is handling the current issues faced within the public sector at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Brother Mosey. Wildcat strikes, I don't like to use the word wildcat strikes. I don't think I used the word wildcat strikes today.
Actually, you did.
I did, okay. But basically is this. It is a time, it's a term when persons become so angry that they just walk off the job. They just, well, I can't take this anymore, I stop, right? And a lot of that is outside of the union itself. Before the union is recognized that, or we call the union and say, well, we think we want to do something, right? So there's a period of anger. The union will come in and then try to diffuse the situation. The truth is this, though. As far as we saw what happened at the sanitation, we saw what happened at the transport board. Okay, these were issues that came up unbeknownst to, I know some people fool you, unbeknownst to the unions at the time. Mm-hmm. Okay, and this that came out of a sense of anger, a sense of frustration. The unions now, the problem I have with the problems I'm having with the unions, because the unions, to me, act as if they have been neutered in such a way that they are afraid, especially in the public service, to confront the political directorate. That's how we feel. And my interpretation of that is not limited to me alone. You can see from the numbers of persons who continue to be members of a union. Union membership has dropped dramatically in this country. Don't let anybody tell you that NUPW has 10,000 members. It's not so. NUPW is struggling with 5. Okay? And there's a reason for that. When people decide to drop out of an institution like a union, it says that they don't think they're getting the kind of representation that they deserve. That's a fact. So 2 things has to happen. Either the union has to look at how they can rebrand and repair themselves. Okay? The fact is, and I keep saying this to people, I have no problem with anybody belonging to any political party that they deem want to belong to. That is their right. Under the Constitution, the right of association, that is their right. The problem stems, though, when you put the cart before the horse, when you decide that you're more loyal to your party than the loyalty to the institution. That is where the issue comes. That is where the issue comes. And that is why I mentioned the 23%, that 23% that was asked from the union on the last administration. The press, and I'm going to get a little lax to you all. You all should have stood up and said, but this is making sense. All the indicators, you could have gone through all of the central bank reports, unless you figure OIB governing the central bank is stabilized. You could have asked any Ministry of Finance, any reputable organization within the government structure, and the answer would have come back. How the hell you get 23%? How can you get 23% and the economy isn't going? Explain that to me. But we allow the marches to go on, and the hype, okay, and the whole disregard for the government at the time, because these people should give you all the money, and we fell into that trap. And what was more glaring, Brother Mosey, and that is another thing that the press did not really carry, is that a couple of months after, Brother Mosey, elections, and what the government, the sitting government that's sitting now did, offer 4.5%. And what did the unions do? They grabbed it and said it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I mean, what more do you want me to say? That if you can behave in that kind of unprofessional with, then persons who are looking on, whether they're B or D or C, will tell themselves something is fundamentally wrong here. And so that is why you will see the numbers that fell off within the labor movement. So if you ask me if they're doing the jobs, I will tell you that I didn't have a lot of work to do. I have a lot of work to do in order to build back confidence.
Just a follow-up question, and by the way, in all fairness to the press, I think that we did cover every angle and we posed those questions to the relevant persons on those occasions. But you mentioned that the unions should settle for less than a 6% in this current iteration of the negotiations for wage increase. However, within the context of our IMF program, where a surplus is required, where SOEs are to be reformed, and even with the growth that was projected and achieved in 2022, projected in 2023, it only puts us back maybe on even keel to post-COVID levels. How can you then justify? I mean, do you think, not necessarily justify, do you think that it may come at the expense of job losses if we have to go to that point of a 6% increase? Anybody else can ask that follow-up with any questions?
You want to go? I will say.
In terms of the 5 to 7% or 5 to 6%, we've had respected economists coming out, and they're independent to us. We arrived at that from our own internal discussions with our experts, and they've said that the economy, in light of the bird, in light of what you just mentioned, can carry the 5% at a reasonable amount. We've had, I think it was Professor Howard recently in your own publication made the point that a 5% would be reasonable. He made a point anything, going double-digit figures would be callous and the economy cannot carry it. So I think whether you take the independent view, whether you take the Democratic Labour Party view, whether you appreciate Walter's point that if you do a 2%, you're not covering the pensioners, so they're eventually left out because what's 1.5 from 2, that's 0.5%, so it's negligible to them. You recognize that 5 seems to be across the board, that 5 to 7% range seems to be everyone seems to agree that that's a reasonable amount that won't crash the economy any further, given the BERT program, given the IMF program, and given the constraints we are. The Democratic Labour Party is economically and fiscally responsible, and we will remain that way. That's why we're not being unreasonable and going up there shouting about the 23%, because we know it's not right. It's not right for all Barbadians. It might sound good. You get a lot of claps and applause, but we know that that's not what a government a party that intends to be a government that really cares about Barbadians would do, because it is not right. We have to, at some point, start behaving in this country in a grown-up way, and we're saying 5 is reasonable. It won't crash the economy. My team, my guys did the numbers. That is what we can carry. If I want to play politics, I could come here and say, man, 15%, big headline, but that doesn't help anybody. That does not show the kind of responsibility and maturity that will be required from this party on forming a government. And that's not the example that I intend or want to set.
Yeah, but Moses, I just wanted to mention as well that traditionally, salary negotiations are based on inflation, right? The current inflationary rate in the country at the time, from the, I think it was the Central Bank report, was about 8.3%. Okay? So the unions that came out asking for 11%. I think this will be, I don't know what their fallback position is, but I think the fallback position should not be on the 6th, my position. But I also want to mention something that I found very, very interesting. I said to you before, we always negotiated based on the inflationary rate. Okay? But the time persons started talking about pensions, what was the cry from the private sector and the government? That any increases should be linked to what? Not the inflationary rate, to productivity. Remember that? But you know what you find ironic? when we speak about about productivity, the first thing that this government did when they got into office was to disband the Productivity Council. So who is going to be able to measure the productivity? So we flying kites, right? Well, we have kite legislation, so this is another kite. So you say productivity, but you disband the Productivity Council, but you want to put productivity in the midst of negotiations. Why all of a sudden you want to change the goalpost? Why is that? You answer me now. You're depressed.
Any other questions?
Yeah, well, actually, I was giving someone a chance.
Yes.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes.
Janique Belgrave, Barbados Today. Mr. Maloney, I just want your honest opinion. Do you believe that unions have failed the Barbadian workforce?
I still have many friends within the movement. I'm still a committed trade unionist at heart. But I think that in some cases I think that in some cases what we have seen is a weakening of the movement based mostly on political assertions than anything else. And I'm a little concerned about that. Like I said, I came out of an environment where as a young man, I sat at a council where persons were, deeply entrenched in both political parties. You can want more politician than Harcourt Lewis. Harcourt Lewis is a treasurer of this organization.
Mm-hmm.
Harcourt Lewis was also the last president of the Civil Service Association and the first president of UPW. He understood that as a unionist, the union came first. The politics would play with itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a tradition. It was a tradition with Barbados Workers Union, NUPW, a tradition. Unfortunately, and we saw what played out over the last 3 years. Okay? We saw it in front of us. We saw the upheaval. We saw the trouble. We saw the distancing. Right? I saw with my own 2 eyes, and I withdrew from the union after a while. I refused to go up there. I saw with my own 2 eyes a young man who was the treasurer of the union at the time. He decided to run as a candidate for the nomination for the St. Michael South on the Barbados Day Party. And he was using the union as his headquarters. Everybody in red shirts every morning coming up there and they're going on to the bail and canvassing. That should never have happened. Should never, because you start to politicize it. You know what I'm saying? That should never have happened. So when you tell me everything they're failing, I think that there's still room for improvement. I still think that there are still good people out there who have the fire in the stomach to represent people.
Mm-hmm.
But surely it has to happen in a kind of more consequential kind of way that is happening right now. So I think there's still, the unions are important. You see what's happening in England now.
Yep.
They're important.
Yes.
But the environment that we are under right now, we can't bear our heads in the sand. We can see it for ourselves. We can see it for ourselves. And so that is why it is going to be interesting to see what the union's position will be if the government do not move from 2%, and the union is asking for the 11%. It'll be very interesting to see what their positions will be.
Dr. Yearwood, I wanted to ask, because you did mention the central bank report to the governor. Well, we just said goodbye to Mr. Haynes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that at this time it would have been more prudent to extend his contract rather than now having to basically search for another governor?
I think first we want to thank Mr. Haynes for a job and for serving his country. Anyone who takes up a job in public life is really giving of service and of self to this country. So we want to thank him first off for that. I think what happened in terms of his contracts come to an end. I won't second guess whether it should have been renewed or not renewed, are really what the government should have done and the Prime Minister should have done. And this is where the issue is on them, is that his replacement should have been announced pretty much at the same time as his contract, and or his contract would be either choice. There shouldn't be a lacuna. There shouldn't be a kind of period where we're unsure, second guessing. The rumor mill is rife about who the new governor will be. That's not how you run a serious economy. That's not how you run a serious organization or a serious country. And it goes back to the heart issues of this government that we raised here: competence and transparency. If you were a competent leader, you would know who is coming in right after the governor has contractually term has come to an end, because it was no surprise that his contract was. It's not like he just woke up one day. This is part of your calendar. You would know, okay, we need to advertise for this position. I've interviewed 3 people. These are the 3 names, and 1 person should be ready to step into that role. What I will say in terms of whoever the new governor is, I hope it is not someone who was part of the architecture of designing and implementing any of the programs that the Vice Central Bank has to monitor. If we're going to talk about transparency and independence, we have to maintain that. It's a key part of how we move forward in this country, and we cannot be giving jobs for the boys and for the girls just for the sake of it. If you are part of the political machinery creating the programs, then how do you go over then and be part of the central bank to judge the very programs that you create and write the very reports that are going to be critiquing your work to do? And on that note, sometimes you have to say thank God for the independence of the central bank, and long may it maintain, because we saw it recently. We got here at the last press conference, and I said, is it true that tourism figures were down by X or Y numbers, 30 to 40%? Minister of Tourism could not answer that question. Still has not answered that question. Central Bank report, I'm looking at it, page 6, table 1, tourist arrivals by source markets. 2018, there was about 600 and something thousand people arriving. 2022, 400 and something thousand. 2019, so if you want to, depending on which base year you want to use, 700 and something thousand. 2022, the 400,000. So we're looking at a difference of between 230,000 to 270,000, more than a 250,000 decrease in tourist arrivals. So here are the numbers. He couldn't answer the question, but this is an example of why we need independent organizations. It goes back to that point I raised about the Commission of Integrity. They should not be involved in these things, because there has to be somebody, some institution in this country that we should be able to depend on for the real figures and the real truth of the political spin, as much as they can avoid it, and the gloss. And here we have it. So I would say, whoever the new governor is, they should not have been involved in the architecture and the day-to-day planning of any of the financial programs of the government. I'm sure people in this room and people listening are smart enough to know who I'm talking about. So those people are excluded. Go and find a professional. We know enough smart Barbadians up there, and put them in that job. That is as much as I would say to this country and to the Prime Minister, because I know she will be listening.
Dr. Yearwood,
Yes.
I listened also with interest your points of transparency as it relates to the integrity in public life legislation. Just last Sunday, Senator Franklin raised the issue of the blind trust. I didn't hear your thoughts on that. Could you let us know what your thoughts on that is?
So now, blind trusts are, and you would appreciate, and I would say this as a slight, I guess, a slight background. One of the areas that I also teach in is trust law. So this is something that I do on a day-to-day basis. And I think there's a slight misunderstanding of blind trust and what they're used for. I get why I think the name is what really throws people, because people think that they're avenues to hide your assets. That is not necessarily the case. What a blind trust essentially does is trying to reduce conflict for people in public life. So if people come into public life, you don't expect them to sell off their shares, sell off everything just to come into public life. They've earned that money, they've earned those things outside of their appointment as MP or legitimately. However, they've earned those things legitimately. The point of having a blind trust is to say you can still give service, but what we're going to do, we're going to wall off your assets from you. So the assets go into a trust where they're managed by somebody else. You have no clue what's happening to them. You have no idea what's supposed to be going on with them. So that when you are in public office, you can't make decisions in policy to grow your assets because you don't know where they are. They could be being invested in construction. They could be invested in healthcare. They could be invested in rural development. They could be invested in all sorts of things that you have no clue. So that's the idea of a blind trust. That is what it's meant for. Obviously, I can understand the concerns of people who question it because what they're thinking will happen, given the smallness of our society, is that it won't really be a blind trust. That you will still know and you will still be making the policy decisions to decide how to benefit yourself. In some of those instances, one of the suggestions that people often would say for creation of blind trust is to make sure that your assets are in stocks and shares and things and in companies large enough and far enough that you really can't influence your policy decisions, doesn't really affect it one way or another. And that may be one way of thinking about it and dealing with both it. Instead of saying someone, you're coming to public life, literally sell everything you've got and come into public life. I'm not sure how that is right because we want to attract everyone into the space. And some people have legitimately made wealth before and they don't want to just come into public life to offer themselves. So I understand the concerns about blind trust. Don't get me wrong, I get why people feel that it's a problem. But at the same point, there are effective tools in aspects that allow you to create that wall between yourself and to reduce conflict of interest. Obviously, a blind trust on its own cannot reduce conflict of interest. And really what we want are that people who come to public life have integrity within themselves. Because sometimes at the end of the day, we can create all of these instruments and we can create X and we can create Y, but really it has to be the person themselves at their core who are honest, who are integrity, who will just take their salary and go home, and they're not about using their office for favor and to grow their own personal wealth. So that's why, as I said, I was very surprised when I went through the legislation, unless someone could spot it, but I didn't. There were missing definitions from abuse of office or willful misconduct. So use your office to probably enrich yourself. I didn't see those definitions in the integrity of public life bill. That said, we know it's for you to declare your assets and it's monitoring that declaration. So, in short, blind trust, they're an effective tool in some aspects, but they do have their issues. But the way that we can think about it is that we can use them in terms of having people to divest perhaps their assets if they have a lot. Stocks and shares, large companies, far removed. So really, your policy decisions can't affect them. That might be a way to handle it.
Final question from me. Mr. Maloney, you have mentioned the volcano workers, those that were recently, whose contract recently came to an end. The argument could be made, however, that they pretty much were on overtime. They went past, the government extended their period well beyond initially intended. How would you respond to that view?
How can you degenerate the such thought? I don't know. Some people on overtime, so the government decide, well, I feel for you, so we can extend and give a little bit over.
Well, it's not necessarily degenerated to overtalk. I mean, maybe the
these are people we're talking about. These are actually human beings we're talking about, right? You created an environment where these people, when they got ill, they couldn't get anything from national insurance. You pretended that these people were contractors, right? You pretended that they were contractors, and The problem with that is you cannot be a contractor if you are set in my time. Right? So you know the contract for her and the contract for services and so on and so on and so on. I would really like, right? I would really like is a couple of those same persons to test the ERA. I am serious. Test it. Okay? And then carry the case to the same ERT, the tribunal. Because those persons were not private contractors. They were employees on the contract. That doesn't make them contractors. Okay? So when you say they extended the time, yeah, they extended the time, but how did they extend the time? I mean, these are people who are looking after the families and stuff. I wish the time could extend all they know. Because it's better to have persons earning a living than to have them sitting on the block doing nothing and sometimes, idle hands. Right? But you can't say that but that's what the governor's there for. The governor's there to look after the vulnerable. Right?
Yeah. But what I said over time, I meant, does that count for something? The fact that it went beyond the allotted time. And additionally, the transition was not a hard transition. There was some skill level off-ramp provided as well.
What is the skill level?
Well, in terms of training, etc., that was offered to these workers.
Where were these getting training from?
There was well, in terms of when they did offer them off-ramp to certain programs.
Well, what it would do, I think that it would be incumbent upon the press to find out from government the numbers of persons who was on this program and was able to get to the polytechnic, was able to go to the skills training program. Okay? And if you can bring me a figure and say, well, these guys that were cleaning up, they were going to the polytechnic on evening and were learning the skill, or they were going to the skills training program and learning something, then I can understand. But until you tell me that, you can show me that. I don't know any of those persons that went anywhere. I don't know. I've been told now that there's some level of training that should be offered to them.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Right. That should be offered to them.
Yeah, but that's
But there's another caveat to that, right? In order to get into the polytechnic, there's certain matriculation rules that you need to satisfy. Unless you're going to be offering them these small, short courses, right? To come on Saturday morning and learn more mechanics and those kind of things that allow them to find meaningful employment. That I could appreciate. But I don't know if the skills training program as it stands right now have the kind of resources to take in the numbers that we're talking about. Yeah. I don't know, right? But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Very interesting. But I think the president has some ideas on this.
Yeah, well, I think I agree with Walter. The skills program maybe would support any retraining or retooling program to help these young men and these young women find gainful employment post these the beautification programs. We thank them obviously for their service. Everybody in Barbados appreciates it, but we also have to think what is the next phase to ensure that they are meaningful, productive citizens in Barbados, gaining and earning to support their families. So if the government can show, as Walter points out, meaningful skills programs engaged through the Barbados Community College or through the Polytechnic, Samuel Jackman, Prescott Polytechnic, that is something that we would be all for, and we would applaud those efforts. But from what I remember seeing reporting in the news, that was not the case. It doesn't appear as those types of retooling programs. So we're still awaiting what programs will be done to support these workers. Any other questions before we wrap up? So the final thing just want us to take away is that all of this is to do with issues of transparency. We're looking at a society that is not functioning, whether you have on the labor or the health side. And a point that we just want to leave you with in terms of the health levy. I think Paul touched on it, but I just want to say, we are paying directly for the support of the hospital. I want Barbadians to understand money leaves your salary every single month to pay for the QUH. That money, since this government came in, does not go through the consolidated fund. If I remember, that 1% levy goes directly to the hospital. We were told that this is a new funding model because the hospital needed money. So at any one point, the average Barbadian could be paying between $60 and perhaps up to $300 out of your salary is going to pay and support the QH. Where is that money going, and why have we not seen the improvements to match this new funding model? Therefore, has the government's funding model failed? And if it has failed, what other models have the government going to think about? We, as Barbadians, we all supported this effort and this approach to get the 1%. We want to see value for our money. And on that note, I want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the press. Thank you for all those following the line. Have a really great weekend. And also to everyone, this is Black History Month as well. We encourage you to support the activities surrounding that and to remember and recognize our heroes and to recognize the independent struggle and other struggles across the diaspora and the world. So happy Black History Month as well, and have a great weekend to everyone. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.